right, gang. Oops, got to accept continue.
Is it me or I'm having a hard time hearing Alan?
Same.
Can everybody else hear me okay? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I can hear you, but you're really quiet.
Well, I can be noisy. That's no problem. So I'll try to speak up here a little bit. You guys can adjust your volume accordingly. So what I did today, hey, welcome, I guess, first off. Some of you I certainly recognize. Some I've seen you in these Zoom meetings before. But I guess there's a lot of new faces for sure. And that's all great. Today's class is just part of what we do at Keller Williams North. And I know Ed, for some of you at least, did a purchase agreement class just this week earlier. And this is kind of part 2 of 3, if you will, of this group of classes that we do. And this is the listing contracts class, the fundamentals. There's also going to be another class that is compliance, sellers disclosures, the ABAs, affiliated business arrangement disclosures that we do as part of any transaction, be it buyer or seller. And we just try to break it up to what makes most sense. And yeah, so I guess just real quick, my history, I've been doing real estate since 1999. Prior to that was with in corporate America. I worked for Makita Power Tools for years and enjoyed that, but I got tired of traveling and decided this was a great move for.
I might be, and I'm trying to get.
We can hear you, Kim. Oh, she muted her. Okay. So yeah, so welcome. And I want you guys to certainly raise your hand, yell, talk, whatever. This is going to be a lot easier for me if you ask questions as we go. Certainly you can save some questions if it's appropriate, but don't be afraid to jump in. And chances are, if you have a question, somebody else does as well, or has been faced with it. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I've like I say, been doing it for a while, so I've got a pretty good understanding. Couple things. We're gonna break this up into 2 segments. First is going to be just simply some basic documents that we use to get information for a listing. Where do you get it? And then secondly, there's going to be 2 or 3 addendums or parts to the listing contract that we'll cover. And then we'll get right into the listing contract, which will be the bulk of it. One thing I want to just give you a heads up on, and this ties in with Ed's purchase agreement class, probably more than the listing class, but we at GRAR, our MLS system, changes these documents all of the time. So the listing contracts, the purchase agreements, they're going to change year to year. And you just recently, within the last month, I know we received an email of the new documents from GRAR, what changed. And it's important that as you go on and over the years, I mean, you're going to get a purchase agreement on one of your listings and you're going to look and see, oh my gosh, this person's using a 3-year-old purchase agreement. And just know that the requirements on those purchase agreements are different from one to the next. For instance, if you check to have a survey done, yes, you know, the parameters of that or the language in that portion of the contract varies from year to year. What's really nice with .loop and our version now documents, we have the ability to keep always the latest and most updated documents there, the listing contract or the purchase agreement. But just know when you receive an offer on your listing, it may be an old purchase agreement and things, the nuances are a little different. So just know that. And we'll get right into kind of the backside of a transaction or a listing, if you will. You're going to see some documents that I sent you or Chanel sent you, and they're called listing card, GIS, BSA tax info, and then BSNA. Some of you, I can't see your faces or that, but I know a lot of you have been into Access Kent or BSNA, which are the different municipalities, information sources. And go ahead and just open up that BSNA document if you can. And I don't know if you printed your document, that's fine, or if you have them on a second screen, that's fine. But I just want to go to the BSNA document first. All right, and this is basically a 2-page summary of this parcel. So anytime we list a property, this is where we start. And by the way, Kim Erickson here, you see on the screen, she is on my team. She works and does a lot of the backside of these transactions for me, building the listings and all of that. So she is always a good source too if you have questions. So that BSA report, just real quick, I'm going to gloss over it. You've got the very first section there, talks about the address. You'll see the parcel number. You'll see who the property owner is. And of course, year built, square footage, things like that. And I want to talk real quick about property owner. This is one of the things you're going to find homes from time to time that are in a trust. So first off, this calls out who the owner is, and you can double check and make sure the person you're talking to is really the owner, or find out the details. But if it's in a trust, that simply tells you, oh, I'm going to need additional documents for the title company when it comes time for this to close, or when we order title work. So just know there may be some groundwork there. If it's in a trust, you'll have to ask some questions, but whoever is signing the listing contract has to be authorized. So one of the trustees, if you will, we recently have a case going on where the homeowner had passed, but the house was in a trust, so his sister is trustee, and now we're working with her to sell it. So anyway, you're going to need documentation like that for GRAR also, if it's in a trust and you have a trustee sign. This will be one of the additional documents you'll have to upload showing that that person has the authority to sign. All right, moving on. So you're going to get into the general information then on the property. And the big things here that we always look at: the zoning, the school district, assessed value, taxable value, those types of things. The homestead exemption, you'll see the PRE, principal residence exemption, showing that it is 100%, meaning this person lives there. This is their declared principal residence, and they get a tax break for that, of course. And just a quick heads up on this, if it is a vacation home or it is not somebody's primary residence, just know that'll read either 0 or something different than 100%. And that could impact the tax prorations and how you handle this through the purchase agreement. So just be aware of that, I guess, is all I'm saying. 100% is good, because then obviously the tax rate's going to be lower. And assuming the buyer coming in is going to be that's going to be their primary residence, that homestead would stay in place.
So quick question. If it is a vacation home or a non-primary residence, so it's not 100% homestead, and the buyer is going to have it 100% homestead, is it going to be a different process, or is it the same process? It's just the taxes might be different?
Well, okay, so if they do tax prorations, remember the seller is going to be prorated at that higher amount. Okay, so what's important probably to do, and is done most often, I think, is that you make a note on the offer, either in the purchase agreement on the buyer side or the seller side, that states the property taxes to be prorated as if homesteaded. Okay, so if I'm a listing agent, I get an offer, that agent doesn't realize that it's at 0% homestead. You know, that can impact the seller if they're paying it based on that higher rate, right? So depending on what time of year, it can really have a huge swing. So you're going to want to make sure, honestly, the fairest, I mean, if you're going to prorate calendar year, probably the most equitable way to do it is to make sure that it's done on a homestead as if the property was homesteaded. You follow me on that, Megan?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Okay, yep. And that changes it. It makes it a lot easier on the seller usually. Okay, and then the second part of this, guys, we're going to go through it real quick. The second page of that, you're going to see the sales history, when they bought it, who they bought it from, what the price was it an arm's length transaction? But more important on this page, the building information, the size, okay? This is a 2,225 square foot ranch. And you're going to see that on the floor area as well as the foundation. They're going to be the same size. The only reason those would be different if there's an overhang on the house or something like that. It shows the year built, and then it gets down into the basement, the lower level. And you can see here on this house, for instance, basement finish, it says 0. Well, I know for a fact it's finished. The homeowner had it done after closing. He used licensed contractors, but didn't pull a permit. Therefore, that doesn't show up on the tax records. Now, it's not a big deal, but you certainly should disclose that, right? That this is, the basement being finished. You're going to put that square footage on the listing, and it's going to come up on the seller's disclosure statement, or should. And it's kind of another class, but this shows 0, and obviously we're going to end up putting it on the MLS showing another 2,000 square feet finished down there. So they're going to conflict, but that's not an uncommon thing. And then also a little further down, it shows a 3,120 square foot farm utility building, nice big pole barn. And so, of course, the dimensions and all of that are going to be needed. Let's go over to that second BSNA tax info sheet, just real quick. This is a simple one. This is all part of the summary, and stop me if you need more time to get there, but this is all part of the summary from the BSNA pages as well, which typically we get off of each township's website. So if I were doing a listing in Cannon Township, I typically go there first to get this information. And what this really does, this page shows us if there's any taxes that are past due, and also importantly, what the summer and the winter tax bills are. What is the amount of those tax bills? All right, and that's just, again, all part of building the listing. The next sheet I want you to see is GIS. It's labeled GIS. And there are sites all over that share this GIS information. One that we're most familiar with is Access Kent. You can do the mapping and it'll take you to these different parcels. Different websites will have different advantages. But I go to the GIS site mainly at first to, number one, look at the property, see what it looks like, the footprint. Where does the house and the buildings, where are they located on it? And also when you zoom in close enough on these, they will give you the dimensions of each parcel leg. And when it comes to building the listing, you're going to have to put the dimensions into the listing of the property. You're going to have to do that on the listing contract. And you can pull it off of these GIS maps or an old survey if you have those. A survey is always preferred. And these GIS maps, they're not 100% accurate, but usually the dimensions are correct. And they are nice because they show easements. And if you look at this one, you're going to see that easement along Elkins. Well, that's where they run the power and phone lines and all of that. So I look at it for any encroachments, any questions I might have for the sellers when I get there, and property dimensions. Okay. And then the next page is the listing card, and that little portion I want to look at. There's not a lot here, but I know Ed put one of these in his purchase agreement class, and everything on here is obviously what information we're pulling from these other websites. And this is our listing we built on this home after we listed it, which was, I guess, the end of last year. One of the first things you do after you turn the listing live is you print this card and you look at it very closely to make sure you've got everything right. You will, of course, already listed the property. It will be live on the MLS before you see this. And we also always share it with our sellers for them to review for accuracy and look at the photos and so on. Any questions on the tax info segment, where to get information, websites to use? This would be a great point for that if you have any questions. A bunch of seasoned people, I can tell. It's all good. All right, so now let's go to, we're going to do some of the MLS docs. documents. And let's go first off to the amendment to listing agreement. And you guys may not like this, but I highlighted just the bullet points of all this. Sherry likes it. It just makes it easier for me to go through the class and just hit the highlights without it. But you guys, I cannot stress enough how important it is to read and to understand these documents. I can tell so many times over the years when an agent really doesn't understand a listing contract or a purchase agreement, more important. And we had one not too long ago that was written as though it was that the buyer's house was already listed and under contract. And yet the offer we received said it was contingent upon the closing of the buyer's home. Well, in talking to the agent, I picked up on the fact that it was not even listed yet. Okay, so she submitted an offer contingent on closing to us on our listing. So clearly she didn't have an understanding that there's a big difference between, getting a house listed and sold and under contract and then going out writing an offer. So had I not just been aware of that, we could have potentially accepted that offer and then really had a mess on our hands. So read these contracts and it'll make life easier for everybody. So this first one is an amendment to either a listing agreement or a buyer's agency contract. So it gets used for both, and 99% of the time is probably the listing agreement. But the big thing is you're gonna use this document when anything on the listing contract has to change. And we're doing this first because it's probably the easiest form. You're gonna have an MLS number and an address to put in there. And what are you gonna change? For instance, if we were listed at $399 and we now want to go to $375, we're going to check that box and we're going to put in that we're going to change the price from $399 to $375. And then basically down at the bottom, made in triplicate this 13th day or whatever we are, 10th day of February 2021, and you have both sellers sign or whoever's required to sign. You're going to check that little box. And then it's going to get sent to Ed or an authorized office manager for signature. And there's several of us that are authorized to sign these. Some of you, if you're on a team, your team leader probably is. But there would be other things you can change and use on this form. For instance, if you realize the sellers want to reserve a chandelier after the fact, this is the place you're going to do it. So you can come back and do that, or you could modify the listing agreement. But things along those lines, very simple. And also, again, you can use this section 2 is for the buyer agency contract, where you've been looking for a buyer for 6 months or a year, and your contract with them expires. This is how you can extend it easily, just simply changing the expiration date. Or if you want to fire them, get rid of them early, and they agree, you can do it there as well to end that relationship. All right. Next, let's go to the delay of submission of listing document. And again, I think these are 3 of the most common agreements that get attached to a listing agreement. So that's why we're talking about them. And it's just easier to handle these first. And then when we get to the appropriate section of the listing contract, we can dive into it a little deeper if we need to.
I have a quick question
Yeah.
regarding that last amendment. So if your listing is live and you decide you need to reserve a chandelier, for example, would you go into the MLS and change that for the public view immediately? And also you're filling out that form?
Right. Because when you go in and make that change on draw, certainly if it's a price change or anything with teeth like that, they're going to want to see the change, see the seller signatures, and have documentation for it. With personal property, I would just do it anyway. I don't know that they would ask for it, if they reserve the chandelier.
Yeah.
I would think that it makes sense to do it on the MLS right away, yes, and then just supply this paperwork.
Okay.
And more is better when it comes to covering your butt on all these things.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And again, that's where you would extend the listing to. Let's say, for instance, you wanted to extend it. You haven't sold it in whatever period, 6 months that you had. You can extend it there as well. So, good with that one? Okay. Delay of submission. So we have the ability, and I know we talked about it a little bit for those of you that were in the meeting on Tuesday. We have the ability to delay going live with a home when we list it. And to just first touch on the rules, and I think Ed was very clear, you know, when you list a home, you want to put a sign in the yard and you're going to go live as soon as possible. You need to get the contract signed and get it uploaded to the MLS just as quick as you can. I wanted to check on this and I should have, but I believe it's 72 hours that you have. And some of you helped me if you've been in a class and heard it recently, but when you list paperwork today, it has to be live within 3 days. Sherry, you raised your hand, is that right? 72 hours, okay. And when you have it live on the MLS, it's important that you upload all those documents though within 24 hours of that, or they'll be right on you and send you a note if you don't get it done, and they can potentially pull the listing down too. So get those documents up and online. But so you have 72 hours to get the listing live. You can put your sign in the yard immediately, and let's say you do that on a Friday. You still don't actually have to have that listing live until Monday and up and going. But obviously, it's in your seller's best interest to get it on the market ASAP and let everybody see it. Now, for instance, if you have a listing that is, we know, a month out from being ready to go because they have to paint or carpet and do these things, well, there's a way to tie that house up, which is, I love this document when they came out, probably just 2 or 3 years ago. It hasn't been that long that we've been using the delay, but that allows me to tie it up. So number one, the seller's not going to go sell it without me being involved, and we've already had that conversation with them. But it keeps another agent from coming in potentially. And an example would be, I've got a house that I'm going to be listing in my neighborhood. I live in Bella Vista in Rockford, which is 1,000+ homes, and man, everybody knows everybody and everybody talks. Well, if Sally talks to Sue and she finds out that they're going to list their house, potentially another agent could get wind of that and come in and cut me out of it by bringing them an offer in a hot market like this, and they take it, and then I'm out. So this protects us in the sense that we're not going to list it for a month, but we're going to go ahead and do the paperwork. We'll establish the price now and all the terms and details. That'll give me time to do all the marketing, pull that all together, and when we hit the market, we're up and running. Now, the issue with this is we can put whatever date we want in there that we're going to go live, even though today's date would be on the listing contract. Okay, so you're going to use the current date when they're signing it on the listing contract. And for instance, if I typically do a 6-month listing, I would add a month on. So in other words, I'm going to put today's date on the contract. We're going to go live in a month, and then I have a 6-month listing period. The only thing is, during that time period, I cannot market this home at all, cannot show it, cannot put a sign in the yard. We can't do anything. So the reality, the only thing this document did is protect me, protect Keller Williams. Right? So if you've got a listing going to go live in a month or weeks, a week, whatever, don't be afraid to protect yourself. Get the paperwork done ahead of time. And again, the highlights on here, it's very clear that you cannot show, market the property in any way. Okay. Any questions on that form?
I do. Could you explain again how you or what you should do with the dates? Like, say if they're not going to list for another 3 months, then you said you always add an extra month, and where would you put that on the agreement? And I'm sorry, I'm just not understanding them.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. So listen, we're going to have a listing contract, that 4-page contract that we have to talk to you.
I am having a hard time hearing you. Sorry.
Sorry. So today's February 10th.
Mhm.
Client today, and we're going to do a delay because they're not going to be ready to list until March 10th. Okay? So what I would do, if it were me, I'm going to have today's date on the listing contract. And I'm going to, because I normally do a 6-month contract, knowing that we're not going to hit the market for the first 30 days, I'm going to make that a 7-month, okay? Now, in this second paragraph on this document, can you guys hear me okay? Shake again if you can. Okay. Seller desires that the broker postpone the submission of the listing in order to prepare the property for showings and create any necessary marketing materials. Specifically, seller and broker have determined that the property shall be filed with the MLS on blank, and that is the submission date. That's the go live date. That would be March 10th, right? Now, let's say, for instance, you got 3 weeks into this and they're ready to go live early, you can do that. Or if they need an extra week, you can do that. All you have to do is an amendment or an addendum to change that, okay? So you would simply say go live date to be changed to March 1st, 2021, and have them sign it. All right. Now, let me just give you a quick little hint. Let's say we went live March 10th. There's 30 days that this listing contract shows that we've had it under contract. But when you list it live on the MLS, when you're building that listing, you're going to put in March 10th as the beginning listing date. That way the home doesn't show up with 30 days on market showing up on the counter. Right?
So I have another question then, Alan.
Yeah.
It seems like an agency document. Like, what's the difference between like you're a seller's agent to them? Like if they sign documents with you to be that you'll be their agent, would they wouldn't really be selling their house with somebody else, or
If they've already signed,
right?
but remember, if we're going to go live in a month, we can't do that because if we list it today, it has to go live within 3 days. We could still list it today and do this delay and go live in a month. I don't know that I fully understood your question, but
Well, wouldn't they be signing agency documents with you first?
at the same time,
Okay,
I would do this the same time I do all the agency documents.
okay.
But what I think she's asking is even if they sign the listing agreement with you and all the agency documents, why would the delay of submission protect you more? How could somebody swoop in?
Oh, they won't if they've already signed. But let's say you're not going to go live till March 10th. You want to just wait and do all documents done in the listing contract?
Well, no, could you date that for like March 10th, the listing agreement, or no?
Okay, so I'm going to let Ed answer that question. You could do that.
I mean, I do it your way. So, but I think that's what she was asking was if they've already signed all the documents, how is the delay going to protect you more?
Exactly.
The only thing the delay is going to do is allow you to delay the listing going live. That's all the delay does. But if I know the sellers aren't going to go live until March 10th, and I'm just thinking about this as a guy that lives in a neighborhood with 1,000 homes and owners will talk. If I know we're going to go live March 10th, I don't want to sit there for the next 4 weeks with hope, or that she doesn't sell it or talk to the right person and get an offer from somebody else. I want to buy that house. Start doing my marketing and spending my money. And that's how I approach it with the seller is that, we're going to start building the listing. We're going to hire the photographer. We're going to do this, that. Yeah, it's just a way of tying it up. I don't want to overdwell on it, but it's an advantage to have that delay on a listing if you're not going to go live for a little while. Okay. All right.
Hey, Alan, if I might, if it's possible for you to either speak up or move a little bit closer to your microphone, your sound is a little bit inconsistent. And so I think people are having a hard time hearing you.
I might have Post-it notes hanging all over
No.
my.
Well, let's see if that fixes it then. Thanks,
Okay.
Alan.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. I don't know where my microphone is, but anyway,
It's good now.
all right, that was probably it then, sorry. All right, the next document I want to cover then is the temporary occupancy. And this is not used very much, but it is a big thing now, and I know Ed talked about it. The market that we're in, I mean, there's just all sorts of crazy things that are going on, but basically possession after close is a big topic. And this addendum simply outlines all of the things that you need to be concerned of. So if there's a possession after close, couple weeks, a month, or even longer, this is something you certainly want to visit. And so this addendum talks, basically it ties it into the purchase agreement dated, and we would all put in the address there as well. But paragraph 1, it says the seller shall have a temporary license to occupy the property until a specific date would be inserted in time. And for a non-refundable fee of X amount of dollars. If they're there for a month and you're deciding to pay them $2,000 a month, you would simply insert it there, payable in advance at closing. So if the seller's paying $2,000 to the buyers after closing for a 1-month possession, this is going to handle it. And that fee will be paid and taken right out of the proceeds of the sale at closing and go towards the buyer's side. Therefore, a credit of that $2,000 for them. All right. So that's like $2,000 less they have to bring into close too, potentially. So during that time, the seller agrees to maintain all the utilities, gas, electric, cable, phone, whatever they have in their name. The buyer, though, because they're going to own the home at that time, they will maintain the structure in the mechanical systems, right? And then the seller shall be liable for the expense of repairing any damage caused by the seller. So if the seller's dog decides to tear up the carpet, they're going to replace it, repair it or replace it. Seller cannot make any modifications to the home after the closing. They're living there, but they can't go in and change things around. Seller and buyer expressly release listing broker, selling broker, and all affiliated with transaction. That keeps us out of the way. If it gets ugly and have problems, this should help us out. Keep us out of trouble, keep that out of trouble. The number 5 talks about fire. And obviously it's the buyer's home at that point. And just 2 insurance notes. The buyer is going to have the homeowner's policy because they own it. The seller is going to get a contents policy to cover their contents in the house, right? That's the right way to do it. Now, if it's only a week or something like that, your insurance company, the best thing to do is to have your client talk to the insurance company, let them know what's going on, and let them make the recommendation of, do we just keep the homeowner's policy in place for a week or what? But when you get into these longer periods of possession after closing, it becomes more and more important. And then, of course, if the seller does not vacate, there's a clause in here, kind of like pre-liquidated damages, where you can determine an amount that the seller is going to be charged at minimum if they don't move out. It's not an option to stay after this date. It's a hard date. But if they fail to move out, there's a way to put a penalty in there, just like we do in the purchase agreement. And then lastly, on their prevailing party in any litigation shall be entitled to recover their costs and attorney fees. So that's kind of a nice thing too, if needed. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but that's certainly some things that you need to be thinking about: insurance, utilities, maintenance, when we get into things like that after closing with possession. All right. Okay, so we're on to the listing agreement, West Michigan Regional Listing Agreement. And I'm going to go over this with you again on the highlighted points, guys. Stop me if anything comes up. But this is a contract, and basically the seller understands the sale of their home will not relieve them of any liability to a lender or lien holders on their property. So you're going to list their property and sell it. Obviously, any loans or liens on the property are going to have to be paid off at closing, typically done by the title company. I'll give you an example. This is just a really unique story, but I've got a seller I'm working with, haven't listed the property yet. They're going through divorce. They purchased this property a few years ago, and it's 2 5-acre parcels right now. Well, they bought it from somebody that was in foreclosure. So the bank foreclosed on them. And it used to be a 10-acre, a house with 10 acres. And the seller, previous seller, thought he was smart and would, because he was being foreclosed on, divide the property, keep 5 acres vacant, and let the bank take the other 5 in the house. And of course they didn't. They didn't allow that, but that seller tried, and the property is now 2 5-acre parcels. So it should be recombined. But the bottom line is, you can't change the legal description. The bank loaned you money on that, and they're going to get their money back first. Just continuing on in that first paragraph, this basically is the seller giving the broker permission to list the property on the MLS and advertise it. And therefore, the fee that they're paying, agreeing to pay, you and a cooperating broker. And so it comes in here and it calls out to seller grants. And you're going to see in this paragraph, still paragraph 1, that first main line though, seller grants Keller Williams Grand Rapids North, the broker. That's your broker, Keller Williams Grand Rapids North. Ed Hansen is the supervisory broker. So anyway, seller grants Keller Williams, and typically this is a 6-month listing contract. That's going to be typical. Sometimes we'll get into some parcels that might be vacant land, or might even go a year on the listing, but it all depends on the current market and so many things. And then you're going to call out, and this is where the information comes from in the BSNA that we talked about, the property. Make sure you fill out the city, township, or village properly. We'll have quite often in Rockford, we'll have a Rockford mailing address, but we're Cannon Township, Plainfield Township, these other places. Now often get purchase agreements that just simply say Rockford, city of Rockford. And even though the mailing address is Rockford, it's not in the city of Rockford. So call those out properly. And then you're going to put in, of course, the county, the physical address of the property, and then the legal or tax description. That also comes from those BSNA reports. And you can go there and you're going to see legal description. And usually it starts out with a parcel number, and then it will say part of, blah, blah, blah. And that's very lengthy at times, especially when you get into acreage or meets and bounds surveys. So you may have to do an attachment, if you will, with the legal description. Quite often, I know that most people will just simply do a copy and paste from the BS&A and then transfer it over to the MLS listing contract. That way you're not going to get into typos. And you can see, obviously, in those legal descriptions, especially this one, it's just full of numbers, and I'm sure it would be a difficult one. So copy and paste is a real easy way to do that, and highly recommended. Of course, we're going to call out the lot size and the acreage and the parcel number. Now on the lot size, when you put this on the listing card right here, or excuse me, on the listing contract here, or on the listing card, when you're building the listing, you always want to start out with the road frontage first. okay? And then go in a clockwise direction. So if I've got a lot that's 100 by 200, basically the road frontage is 100 by 200 by 100 by 200. Did I say that right? Yeah. So counter or go clockwise, remember, and call that out. Call the road frontage out first. Now, the next portion is for condo sale. And if it's a condominium, a true condominium, the unit number and the condominium name, as well as the LIBOR and the page and the document number, will all be right in that legal description that you got from BS&A. It will simply say unit number 12 in the Silver Ridge condominium, according to, and then it'll go on LIBOR and page. So all that information will be right there on either like Access Kent or a BS&A. In all of these counties, Ottawa, Montcalm, they all have these websites as well. They're not all as good as Access Kent for sure, with the amount of information they get. Some of the townships even want to charge you for those BS&A reports. Some will give them to you for free. So there's a lot of different sources though to get this information, depending on where you're at. So paragraph 2 talks about agency representation. And this simply tells a seller that not all agents coming through and showing your home are going to be working for you as a seller. But we all know in Michigan, by default, we all work for the seller until there's a buyer's agency contract in place, right? We all are looking out for the seller. So this simply says that buyers coming through likely will be working with another agent. That agent will be representing their interests. Okay, paragraph 3. We are a designated agency firm. And the easiest way for me to explain this, if you go back, I don't know, it was over 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, designated agency did not exist in Michigan, which simply meant anytime a Green Ridge agent sold a Green Ridge agent listing, it was dual agency. Okay, so it was really complicated. And then they came out with this designated agency now, which simply means only myself and my supervisory broker, Ed Hansen, represents you. Okay. Easiest way to say it. It's just the two of us. So Katie comes along and sells my listing on whatever street. We're not in that dual agency relationship where years ago we were. So designated agency has to be called out. And then that's where you would put your name in as well as Ed's as the supervisory broker. And number 4 talks about dual agency. Again, these are all agency relationship things that are going to be on the real estate agency relationship form that's covered in another class. But this simply again tells the seller, hey, I could be a dual agent. State of Michigan says this is certainly an option. Now, dual agency, it calls it out right here. If you're a dual agent, in other words, you have the home listed and you've got a buyer under agency contract that you're representing, you are now stuck in the middle and cannot say anything or do anything which might place one party at a disadvantage. Okay, so you become an intermediary, a facilitator, and a mediator to assist buyer and seller. It's really an awkward spot. You can't really truly represent your seller who you signed on, in full capacity. There's ways to do this, and I'll tell you most recently and just most often, if I have a listing and there's a buyer that comes to me and wants to buy it under, through me, no problem, but I'm representing the seller. I'm not going to get put into a dual agency. And you certainly can't do it unless the seller agrees to it, okay? And it would take some further disclosure on my part to feel comfortable with that. And I have had situations where I've been a dual agent, and I can give you some ideas on how to go about that if you want, but The preferred, the way I disclose this or talk about it with my clients at a listing appointment is, I don't want to be a dual agent. I want to represent you and your interests. You listed with me and that's what you want. So if a buyer comes in, they saw the sign, saw some advertising we did, whatever, they contact me, want to see the house, they decide to buy it, I'll write the offer for them, but I'm going to let them know that I represent you. And I will tell you that 9 out of 10 times buyers are fine with that. They're comfortable. If they're comfortable with you and feel that, you know, you have the confidence to do it right, you know, they can proceed with that. But I don't feel good about signing on as a listing agent with somebody and then turning around, have a buyer contact me. And let's say, for instance, they do like it, but I've never met them. I don't want to put them under buyer agency contract on this house and then just muddy up the water. But if I do get it where they want to write an offer, basically on the agency relationship disclosure, it's going to be changed to now dual agent. And I'm going to have all 4 parties, buyers and sellers, sign that, acknowledging that I'm a dual agent. And I'll give you an example of a dual agency that I did. We had 2 couples at church. I had known the one couple, met the other couple just briefly, but they were sitting in church, going to list their home, and ended up sitting next to somebody that decided to buy their home. And they just shared it. And they came together, they put price and everything that they knew of to discuss on the table and talked it through, and then contacted me. And then I did all the paperwork for them. And I was kind of in the middle. And I guess on that one, I was the transaction coordinator, but I would have been a dual agent, would have been the same role basically. But I sat them down at the table together, buyer and seller. And that was the easiest way for me to handle both parties and not treat either differently. But when you get into the offer and you're talking tax prorations, I mean, just all the survey nuances, just all these things, who pays for a survey? I don't want to have that conversation one-on-one. I want to have it 1-on-3, right? I want all parties be there together to go through it. So they know you're not putting anybody at a disadvantage. Make sense? Dwell on that a little bit, but try to avoid a dual agency at all costs. It's just not a good situation to be in, and you're exposed. Your exposure is a lot higher if you are. Land Division Act, number 5, talks about we've got some property and there may be enough acreage where we think we can split it. And you want to be careful on making any representations on what can be done. Certainly, I think, let me take a sip here. When it comes to splitting property, yes, as a listing agent, first thing you want to do is talk to the township zoning administrator and find out if there's splits available. And that's not always an easy answer. And sometimes it's long and drawn out and they have to get attorneys involved. So it can be a pretty lengthy process. Usually it's pretty cut and dry, but it's a process. And as a listing agent, you don't want to overexpose yourself. You're going to want to encourage that a buyer's agent and the buyers also go to that municipality to learn and discover, can this property be split? How so? How many times? Because obviously that affects the value for both buyer and seller, but it's an important thing, and you just want to minimize your statements about, you know, it can be split 5 times. There's a lot of nuances to that stuff and approvals required ahead of time. So see us if you have any questions on that, but just know that it's not necessarily dividable. Okay, fixtures and improvements. This is a huge part. Now we're starting to get into the meat and potatoes of the listing contract, and we're going to describe what stays with the property. Typically, everything that's secured to the home is going to stay. It's the easiest way to think about it, according to the contract. Of course, you can change anything you want, But let's talk about those things first that are going to stay for sure. And it's so funny, you guys. I mean, this stuff gets called out, but I mean, going way back, I had somebody take all the shelves out of the closets above the closet rods, right? Just because it was unattached wood. She thought she could take it all. And, you know, you want to avoid that, but the time to, how do I want to say this? If there's ever bitter feelings at the end of a transaction, it's usually, it's often because of things that were expected to stay, didn't stay, washers, dryers, appliances, shelving units, workbenches, TVs. These things are this is the time to handle all of these. So read this, go through it, know that if it's attached, it's going to stay. In the areas, I'll give you 4 or 5 things that come up often, most often. Besides appliances, mirrors. Bathroom mirrors, if they're secured to the wall, they stay, unless otherwise noted. If a mirror hangs by a string, it doesn't have to stay. And bathroom mirrors often hang, these decorative mirrors hang on a cable. So ask that question. Mirrors, you know, any of them staying or going? The other big one today is flat screen TVs. Technically, the way the boilerplate works, the bracket would stay because it's secured to the wall, but the TV goes with the seller because it just hangs on that flat mount. Okay. Windows, shades, blinds, built-in, you know, kitchen appliances, garbage disposal, all of that stays. There's a few things, well, in addition to, I guess those couple of items would be pet containment systems, underground fences. The way this is worded, the collar, the control unit, and the underground fence all stay with the homeowner, the buried underground wire. Certainly, I have a lot of clients that take that pet containment system or collar with them because it fits their dog. You know, if you have 2 different sized dogs, it could be ugly. You know, you get a little dog and a big charge. So anyway, they often take those systems with them, but you call it right out on the listing contract. And here's where we'll do that. You can see towards the bottom of that same page, it says, and also includes. Okay, so all of these permanently affixed to the property and everything called out above is going to stay, but it's also going to include, and I would put in, for instance, a hot tub here. Yes, the hot tub's wired and it's hard, you know, hardwired into the house, and technically it stays, but don't be afraid to write it in there to make it crystal clear. The hot tub's going to stay. Or the next line down, but does not include the hot tub, those items that the seller wants to take. So this is the time to spend 5 minutes, have that conversation with the sellers, what stays, what goes. You know, is there anything you want to take? I used that chandelier example a little while ago. I didn't want them to take the chandelier down because it was a very nice chandelier, but it was part of their wedding gifts, I guess, if you will, from their parents or whatever. I had them leave that, but then simply write in that they're going to reserve it, but will replace it, you know, and credit the buyer $500 towards a lamp of their choice or a chandelier of their choice. So there's things that you can do to offset that, but call them out. And in that paragraph, you're going to see 4 sections that talk about owned, rented, or not applicable in this security systems. Okay, propane tanks, water softeners. These are all things that we need to call out and ask, do you own it? Do you own the water softener or do you rent it? If it's a rental, you close on the house, the rental company comes in and says, hey, we'd like to take our water softener back now or sell it to you. The buyers aren't very happy, you know, getting that surprise late on. So it's nice that it's called out here now. So spend the time on this paragraph with your sellers, and you'll be happy in the long run and avoid those things that complicate the end of a transaction. And I'm going to just give you one last quick example on that. you're going to have a seller's disclosure statement that you always fill out with your sellers. Talks about the condition of the property, appliances, and I hope you all know what's listed on a seller's disclosure statement has nothing to do at all with what stays with the house, right? If somebody calls out the stove, refrigerator, microwave all work, washer, dryer work, they can still reserve those on the listing contract. The reason it's done on the seller's disclosure statement, though, stating that they work is, let's say sellers are reserving them, the washer and dryer, but yet they say that they stay or that they work on the seller's disclosure statement. Those buyers could negotiate to have the seller leave the washer and dryer in their offer. And now we know that they work, right? But if they were both broke, they probably wouldn't try to negotiate that into the deal. So just know, if it says that it works on the seller's disclosure statement, that does not mean that item stays with the house. Yes is checked, but that just simply means it works. So we've had cases where, you know, again and again, the agent assumes that because it was checked yes on that seller's disclosure that it stays, and you just can't do that. So call it out in that paragraph in the purchase agreement every time and you'll be happy. Okay, paragraph 7, heating and cooking fuels. This talks about basically propane or fuel oil. And there's only a few things to know. That number one, if the home's listed in the winter, of course, we don't want it to run out of fuel oil or propane. So they need to keep oil in it. And the seller, certainly if they time it right, let's say they've got a full tank, they're going into winter and it gets down to, you know, half a tank and they sell the home, they don't need to resupply most likely. But it says here that they must keep it at a minimum of 10%, and they can't sell back or expect credit for anything that's left in the tank. Okay. We've had people try to sell it back to the propane company or sell it to the buyers, and that's not the way it works. So if you're at a house with propane or fuel oil, have this conversation at the listing. Okay, paragraph 8, sales price. This is what you're going to list the home for on the MLS. And through a CMA and talking with a seller, you'll have that conversation, but here's where you're going to write it in. And it basically says, you know, this is the price with the seller's consent that we're going forward, but it includes the seller's obligation to pay any outstanding balances on liens, encumbrances, etc., taxes. You always want to try to find out where your sellers are with a mortgage. There are some tools through RPR that you can get in and see, hey, do they have a mortgage? Or when did they last pull out their mortgage? You know, it isn't 100% accurate, but it should have all recorded documents so you would at least know when they last pulled a mortgage out. You want to make sure they're not upside down. It's usually not a problem. Sellers know where they stand, but if they had a lien on the property, Kim and I had one 2 years ago that we knew we were up against a wall when we listed this place, and it was just a mess. And just about 2 weeks before close, the state of Michigan came in and filed a $305,000 tax lien. And we couldn't sell the house because he owed more than he was going to get for it with that tax lien. And ended up having to go through foreclosure, and state probably got less money than they would have, but that's that. So, terms, okay. Number 9, paragraph 9 talks about the terms that the seller will accept on a home. And of course, we always like cash. Cash is great. Very few hurdles to clear when you're dealing with a cash buyer. New mortgages, several types of mortgages: conventional, VA, FHA, MISHDA, RD, rural development. We want to be careful. You guys know sometimes FHA, even VA, will have requirements for a home. Minimum standards. if you will. They're a lot easier to work with, but you get some homes, and we just had one, we're closing tomorrow, that there was no way in the world it was going to go FHA. And we knew it would be a struggle to get it to go VA. And once we had a deal fall apart and got the inspection report, it was clear it wasn't going to go VA either. So we had to simply offer or advertise the home as though cash or conventional type mortgage. And
I have a quick question on that.
Yep.
So now, does FHA, can you waive inspections for FHA buyers?
you can waive the inspections, but remember, it's the appraiser.
Right, yeah. No, I just, because I know that like VA loans require a termite inspection.
Right?
So I didn't know if FHA had certain guidelines that they required too.
No, I think, and I may be wrong, chime in somebody if I am, but I believe you could waive inspections for an FHA deal, because those inspections don't get shared with the bank or anybody. The only inspection report that does is going to be the appraisers on FHA. So the appraiser, Megan, can come in and say, you know what, we need you to fix this peeling and chipping paint, get rid of this carpet wrinkle, I see a tripping hazard here above the steps, those types of things. The appraiser can call out.
I think
Okay.
it depends on the lender too, about
Pardon?
if you can waive that FHA.
Say again, Sherry, I'm sorry.
I think it depends on the lender on if you can waive the FHA inspection.
Okay.
Each lender is going to be different, so you just have to read the requirements, I guess, of their pre-approval letter. It should state in there, when the offer comes in.
Okay. I haven't seen that. Certainly very possible that the lender requires it. Now, again, it's going to be the appraiser is he's the one working for the lender to make sure. Okay. And then, of course, land contract, purchase money mortgage, those are options, other types of seller financing. And certainly some sellers are open to and happy to do land contract purchases. It's always a nice deal as a seller if you've got the funds and the property works out. Usually it's done more on vacant land, if you will, than homes, but certainly a nice way to go about it. And then if you are going to do land contract, you have to write in your minimum terms here. Okay. Okay, paragraph 10 talks about the brokerage fee. This is where the seller agrees to pay the broker a fee of, and you're going to notice the blank here. The way that we write it in is we put our broker fee first plus the percentage of commission. And let's say we charge a $400 broker fee. We would simply write in this line to pay a broker fee of $400 plus 7% or 6%, whatever your listing is at. So that one line, the broker fee plus the percentage of commission. And as we know, we are a minimum 6% company here. Okay, at Keller Williams North. And that 6%, half of that has to be paid out to the buyer's agent, not half of, excuse me, because if you charge 7, we still are only required to pay out 3%. We want to pay out 3% on all of our listings, and that's the bottom line. And that broker fee of $400 plus 7%, you're going to see down later in this paragraph 11, it shows what we're going to pay the buyer's agent and what we're going to pay if there's a sub-agent to the seller. We'll come back to that in a second. I want to jump back up to paragraph 10. And that third bullet, and again, you guys should read all this. I don't want to cover every word for word, but that third bullet in paragraph 10 says, or if the property is sold or leased within X number of months after expiration of a listing period. I skipped over part of this. They're going to pay that commission of the sales price. You can also put in a flat fee, which sometimes we will do on lower priced vacant land, or a house that's just going to be, let's call it lower priced, and you need to give more incentive to the agent. But this third bullet is a protection clause, okay? Let's say you have a listing, you can't sell it, 6 months go by, you've showed it 30, 40, 50 times. And let's say somebody came through 3 or 4 times, or even once with you, and after the listing expires, they decide to go forward and make an offer on it directly with the seller. Let's say it expired, they pulled the sign out of the yard and did nothing. These buyers approach them a month or 2 later, come in, try to make an offer on the property. This would protect you in the sense that that seller owes you a commission. If you brought that buyer in under your listing and they went ahead and, tried to put an offer together after the fact. Now, if the property is relisted at all with another broker, that protection goes away. But you're protected for whatever period you write in there. You could write 6 months, 12 months. I do a standard 6 months on that. But that prevents somebody from circumventing you. And that's a good one.
So is that information public to like a buyer's agent? If I wanted to, like I have a buyer that's interested in a house that we looked at a while ago, but it's no longer, it was pulled. So would I approach the seller or the agent?
Okay. What I do, Katie, and I think is the best thing to do is to contact the agent, right? Because 9 out of 10 times you're going to learn a lot in that conversation. Typically, they might have a good relationship with the sellers, but they just, came to be that they couldn't sell it. But I wouldn't personally feel good about going directly to the sellers with an offer right off the bat. If it was a little later, yes. But if I know that agent, I'll reach out to them always just to find out, because I will tell you also, they can make it very easy to put that deal back together for you. So I've done it that way for sure.
Okay, thanks.
And I know there's a lot of agents that would just go directly to the owner.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Probably a little more conversation, more case by case,
Mhm.
on all of those. We had one that I had on Brower Lake last year that we didn't sell, and they wanted out of the deal, and I was tired of them, and I let them out. And sure as heck, 2 months later, Kim's smiling, they sold it, But I don't know if it was to somebody. I don't think it was to somebody that we showed it to, but it was just one of those deals. Okay. So you get your protection clause, and paragraph 11 talks about how we're going to share that portion of the co-op, the broker fee. So if let's just say I'm at 7%, subagent of the seller, what am I going to pay a subagent of the seller? Okay. We offer 0% to a subagent. My thought process is, if a buyer doesn't have the confidence in that agent, why should we, as the listing agent or as a seller, let that agent represent us? And you just discourage subagency by putting a 0 in there. So I go that route. Buyer's agent, though, we're going to, of course, pay somebody 3% if they come through as a buyer's agent. And then transaction coordinator, we put in 0 because I'm listing the home and I could be the only transaction coordinator, and I'm not going to be. So we put in 0 there as well to discourage a buyer or another agent from coming in and just muddying up the waters. So, okay. Inquiries, paragraph 12 simply says that if the seller receives contact from somebody or inquiring about the property, that they should share that with you. Absolutely. And then you can follow up with that buyer. I always have the conversation and let my folks know I don't want them to let people in the house. If somebody knocks on the door, says they're interested in buying their home, give them my card, give them my name, number, whatever, have them call me. And it doesn't happen as much as it used to, because there's so much information, I think, available just through our cell phones out at the front of the curb. But you want to have them share that buyer information with you so you can follow up. Okay, title work. Of course, we're going to produce clear title, convey by warranty deed the property. And we always use the expanded coverage ALTA policy when possible. There are times where you can't because of building and use restrictions, but the ALTA is what is used primarily. Of course, bottom of that page, you're going. I didn't mention it earlier, but you've got the property address, the date in there, and the initials. But on the left side of that page, note the revision date, 2/20/2020. That's when this listing contract, so you know which one you're dealing with. And again, on the purchase agreement, more so than this document, you want to make sure you're dealing with the latest contract if you can. Okay, possession and occupancy. This is real straightforward. It says that the seller plans to give possession of the property at the completion of the closing. So in other words, hand the keys over as soon as you sign and get your proceeds check. Or you're going to stay in the property X number of days after closing. And the completion at close is very simple. And most states require possession at close. Michigan is one of the states that allows possession after close. And there's obviously concerns for that, but the way you list it does not necessarily dictate the way it's going to be. This is the way you're offering the property. Keep in mind, buyers can make offers any way they want, and you can renegotiate that. And it's very often that we go through that discussion. I want to tell you it's a disadvantage to put in there that the seller wants 30 days possession after close. I don't like doing that, even in a hot market, because it's a deterrent to buyers. And if a buyer purchases the home, obviously sometimes they have to get kids in school and they just want to live in their home. Very straightforward. Keep that at a minimum, possession after close, to make it look more appealing on the listing card. If the home is occupied by a renter, just know that there may be other rights, tenant rights, and just something to ask. We've got a property for sale right now that's a rental down on Kalamazoo, and it's always a pain to show, and we would need to have a buyer submit to whatever their lease terms are. So if they had another 60 days on it, we have to make sure that's covered in the offer. All right, continuing on, marketing. This obviously is allowing you to put signs on the property, advertise it on the MLS, advertise it on other websites, and that this information we're sharing, I mean, it isn't private. We're going to talk about the price and the terms of the offer. So that'll be disclosed, and you're just getting acknowledgement on that from the sellers. And then you can also remove those for sale by owner signs or whatever's in the ground too. But any other signs you can remove. The broker is or is not authorized to use an electronic style key box. And this simply calls out, we're going to use electronic or a combination of some sort lockbox on the property. We use electronic. I highly recommend them. Some people still use the old push buttons, but these newer electronic devices are awesome. Trackability, you can program them to work only during certain hours. And you can track the history, who's been in the house, what time, what day. It's kind of neat. You can even block a certain realtor out. I didn't know that, but if you wanted to, you could. I had a seller that did not want to allow a specific agent to show a house one time. So Ed discouraged us from doing that. So we did allow him to show it, but he didn't care for that. Okay, submission of offers. Oh, this talks about authorization to order services. I'm sorry, paragraph 16. So this basically says that if they can, the seller can allow you to order services like a survey or inspections, well and septic. It's smart to get some sort of confirmation from the seller, though, that if you're going to order a survey and spend money, get their permission to do so in writing to make sure who's going to pay for it. You always, you get a house under contract and you've got to order a survey and you start doing all this work. I always make sure with the seller that they're clear I'm ordering that for them. And it's basically, it's their expense, depending how you work it out in the purchase agreement.
Can I chime in on that, Alan?
Please, please.
I had one where I was authorized to have the septic tanks pumped. Obviously, they needed the pump card before close. And so I was calling around to find somebody to do that service. And the company told me it was going to be one amount. And I went to the seller and said, it's going to cost this much. And they were like, okay, good. We're good with that. So the company went ahead and did the work and then charged us almost double because there was more tanks on the property than we knew, but they did not call us first. So here the seller's on the hook to pay the full amount, when they thought they were only going to pay a certain amount. So, this is where our value comes in, where, we might be, willing maybe to cover the difference, as a realtor, so it's just something to think about, is make sure you have it in writing when somebody says that they are going to, perform work. If it's a written estimate, get that in writing so that that company can't really do like price gouging, basically, So.
Right.
The first thing that I learned, and it's always stuck with me in real estate, everything in writing. Get everything in writing. That's always stuck in my head. The first day I walked into Keller Williams, get everything in writing.
CYA, cover your anatomy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. And I know agents and I do it myself. I have a Google storage like this big, right? I keep every email that I've ever had, I think, from my Gmail, just so I can go back. And if you got to find that email that says, yeah, you gave me permission to do this or whatever, I like having that history there. Yep, for sure. Okay, we'll move on. Submission of offers, this paragraph, number 17, gives the seller the option to say yes or no. I want to look at backup offers. And I'm always of the opinion, heck yes, let's take backup offers. And you can say, no, I don't want to take backup offers. And there's theories to both. And Zach went and I had a long conversation and I totally see his point. If you have a house and basically you have, and I guess to explain what it is first, so everybody has a firm understanding, a backup offer can only happen if you have an accepted offer already in place, right? You've got a primary offer, it's been accepted, it's in place. Backup offer would be a second buyer coming in saying, hey, I want to buy this house. If anything happens to that first deal, I would agree to buy it according to these terms in this purchase agreement. And this purchase agreement calls out that it's a backup offer. By the way, we have a very nice backup offer addendum that talks about how everything is going to be handled with earnest money, et cetera, if somebody wants to walk away. But this backup offer, if something happens to the first deal where inspections happen, buyer kills the deal, or buyer just even opens the door asking for a repair, the seller can technically walk away at that moment from the first offer and accept, and have accepted already that second offer. In other words, that backup offer would be accepted contingent upon the first deal falling apart, if you follow me. So You've got a primary offer, you get a backup offer, you can accept that backup offer subject to the first deal falling apart. And then if the first deal does fall apart, automatically at that moment, the second offer becomes primary, and your job is to let the other agent know. As soon as you let them know, it's official. Okay, so that gets moved right into the queue. You've already probably got title work ordered. You're just simply going to have to change the buyer's names, and everything keeps going smoothly, getting the seller closer to close quicker. And I prefer to do it that way. There's others that say, hey, I want to put it back on the market and see if we can't get you more money. And maybe in this market you can, but either way, there's risk to that. But it's a nice to have those options, and I've certainly exercised it. Non-discrimination, of course, paragraph 18, based on race, religion, color, national origin, age, sex, marital status, height, weight, physical or mental disability, or familial status is prohibited by law. Very straightforward, everything we do. There's also the new clause in here about buyer's love letters. This is the second part of paragraph 18. Seller directs broker that a letter from the buyer will or will not be presented with any offer to purchase. I don't like these letters. We've had a couple cases when they first started happening that basically people were not truthful. And sellers were making decisions based on these letters, which potentially could be a problem. And concerns for discrimination. So I basically do not. And I think Ed would probably recommend we do not share these letters with sellers. This gives you permission, if you receive a letter, to not share it, bottom line. Paragraph 20, seller's disclosure statement. You're going to spend some time in a class, if you haven't already, that's going to talk about how to fill out a property disclosure statement. And just to touch on it again, it simply discloses the condition of the property to the best of the seller's knowledge for the buyers to review. And you want to make sure when you're doing that disclosure that you take the time to do it right. Talking about water in the basement, has there ever been roof leaks? You know, sit there, talk with your clients, fill it out properly. Just remember that all you're doing is talking about the condition of the property on that form and not talking about what stays with a home.
One thing I was advised to with the seller's disclosure, sorry, I was just on the phone call real quick, but that's what you're talking about, correct?
Yes, yep.
Yeah. So one thing that I was advised to with the seller's disclosure, you do not ever fill it out. Don't even write the address on it. Like you can sit with the sellers and go over it, but you do not put anything on that seller's disclosure because then you could be held liable.
I can't agree more. I've heard it so many times. I shouldn't say it, but sometimes I do fill it out. And, you know, you've got to be careful and do it right. There's no question. You know, I've got an elderly gal that doesn't do e-signatures, and, you know, she's in South Carolina. I'm sorry, but I got to do it, right? But I send it to her to look at and discuss, and I've got 2 witnesses on the phone at the same time, her son and her daughter, doing this report, or the disclosure. I agree with you, Megan. Absolutely, if you can. Yeah, have them do it every time. And make them complete it. Okay. Representation of age. You've heard about lead-based paint possibilities. So we're either going to call this out as being built in 1978 or later, or 78 or later, or prior to 78. And paragraph 22 talks about your responsibilities under lead-based paint. I think we all know that we're supposed to give the client the EPA's How to Protect Your Home Against Lead-Based Paint form. We have that both in electronic version. I think we even still have some printed versions in the office. So that's very important. Paragraph 23 talks about disclosure of information. Again, price, terms, all details with respect to the property. They are not confidential, and we'll be sharing those with other realtors through the MLS. In that paragraph also, we always check the box. As the seller, I request that agent for owner appear. So on the listing card, either your name is going to be on there or the owner's name, and we go as agent for owner. Paragraph 24 is a hold harmless. Basically, if damage occurs to the property arising out of any showing, this protects you and the buyers or whoever's going through the home from being responsible for that damage. One example I can think of is a storm door that blew open, and the hinges sprung in a wind. And the seller saying, oh, they didn't latch it right or whatever. You can't go back and expect agents to pay for that. This protects you in that regard. Consent to fees, guys, paragraph 25, this simply talks about referral fees. We work with different agents, different states. Somebody might be moving to Michigan and they try to find an agent here to help. Their South Carolina agent, maybe trying to find somebody here locally to help. This simply, acknowledges that there may be some referral fees that go back and forth. Corporate relocation, there's a lot of that. And even these websites today, pursuing buyers and people listing, they'll sell and expect referrals on some of these leads. All right, so broker's remedies, this talks about if, for instance, seller decided we're not going to sell anymore, this would help you potentially recover some of your expenses if you were wanting to go down that road. For instance, marketing costs, any advertising costs, things like that, potentially you could go back. I'll tell you, I've never done that. It doesn't feel right. I mean, if you gave it a good whirl, 6 months, and they decided they just aren't going to sell, that's one thing. But if you get 3 weeks into it, spend $1,000 on photos and everything else, just say, and they decide to change their mind, well, hey, I just spent some money on this. But I had one not too long ago that I did, and we had it up for sale for a couple months and let it go. And I'm not going to go back to them for expenses, but hope that they will come back my way, if they want to sell again. So, but it's certainly an option. This covers you on that. Paragraph 27, yes, you're a US citizen or not, and not that they can't sell a house, but there may be some tax implications, different tax implications if they're not citizens. Paragraph 28, simple, talks about electronic signatures, acknowledging that, fax, electronic distribution. Paragraph there on wire fraud, and I think you guys are all very up to speed on that probably, but don't get yourself involved in sharing emails with wiring instructions. Your client should always be dealing directly with their bank and not through you by any means. And recommend they do it in person whenever possible, dealing with wiring instructions. We've got some pretty significant cases that have happened here in Michigan and locally where people lost some pretty good wire transfers, pretty good size transfers. Audio surveillance, paragraph 30, today we've all got video systems in our houses, security cameras, whatnot. People can run cameras, but they are not supposed to be running the audio on security systems, so and it's recommended, you should recommend that they turn that off if they have that in their home. And there's paragraph 31 where you would put in any special conditions or anything else that's needs to be noted. And they sign, of course, joint ownership, sole ownership. You would sign it. And agent for broker, that's where Keller Williams, Grand Rapids North would be. Of course, always get their information and put it on here. If something were to happen to you and we needed to contact that client of yours, you know, I know the office needs phone numbers, email addresses, everything we can. Not that we expect that, but if there's ever a problem, we want to be able to get a hold of that client without any issues. So please make sure that's updated as well. Wow. That was it on my end. Any questions, things we didn't cover? There's got to be some stuff.
I guess
I do have a
few-
question. Oh, go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, Megan. I just have a question about, again, the seller's disclosure. When are they exempt from filling that out? And when are they required? I mean, you know, if there's a certificate of trust existence, I've heard that they still are required to fill it out, but just a question about that. So
Yeah. So at times you can only partially fill it out. Let's say, for instance, that person didn't live in the home. However, you know, it's city water, city sewer, natural gas, those types of things can be filled out. The board wants you to fill it out whenever possible, as detailed as possible. I have one that we listed, actually the one we closed tomorrow, in the trust, and the attorney did not want her to fill anything out on the seller's disclosure statement. So we did not. And that's just the way we left it. Sellers never occupied the property. And is simply acting as a trustee, you know, or whatever we wrote for language. So I think you need to fill it out every time, Sherry, as best you can. Unless, in this case, it made it very easy for me, advised by, you know, the attorney not to. Somebody living out of state is going to have a very hard time telling you anything about the house. And again, then you just have to question the accuracy because, you know, but I think every time you can fill it out, you fill out what you can and have the seller sign it.
thank
A
you.
question with that, like I noticed, I'll go to put an offer in on a house and like half of it's filled out. So as like the listing agent, like should they have like tried to push them to fill more out, or you really can't?
They should have pushed them to fill more out. And you should as a buyer's agent. Okay, for instance, yeah, the basement had a water leak, you know, 2 years ago. And the problem was fixed. I think Ed talked about something like this in the meeting. You as a buyer's agent should dig in, okay, and say, hey, I need to know a little bit more about this leak. Where did it happen? What did they think the cause was? You know, was it coming in from a room above? Was it coming through the wall? Was it seeping in the floor in the mechanical room? So always get that more detailed information after the fact. But I think on the report, it's clear you should disclose it, where it was, any remedies that you put in place. That help?
Yeah, I've never listed a house yet, so I've never had anybody fill it out. And I'm kind of just wondering, I mean, if they're not willing to answer it, or at least write, I don't know in it and just like leave it blank. I feel like something is better than nothing. And
Right. And so, you know, this goes back to, I forget who was saying, Megan, that never fill out the report for the owner. And that's so true. But when I sit there with them and, you know, I make sure every line gets filled in properly. And that's really what you should do. Absolutely. And skimming over it, which if you just send it disclosure to them and let them fill it out, it's going to come back half filled out, maybe 3/4 filled out, and the other stuff, they just don't take the time to do it. Well, you need to dig in, right? So you as a buyer's agent need to dig in and get them to get the information. It's only fair. And I was called out by a buyer here not too long ago. And I've got a really distressed property for sale, really distressed. And we didn't disclose much beyond, it had water everywhere. It had, just this, that, and the other thing. But there was a lot of unanswered questions, and the buyer pushed back on me and said, it just feels like it was maybe the easy way was taken, filling out this disclosure. So I really had to drill down, and we did get those answers and redid the disclosure. But good for her for calling me out on it. That was right.
So my question, it's kind of related to the listing agreement for like the well and septic and like the section for the well and septic. Now, if a buyer comes in and waives inspections, are the sellers still required to obtain and pay for a well and septic report?
Yes, my answer would be yes. And there are different paragraphs. And if my buyer, if we write an offer and we are waiving inspections, we're going to simply write, where's the inspection paragraph? Oh,
I'm just asking because I had a listing and the buyers waived inspections, but they were asking about the report, and I was pushing my sellers like, hey, we have 10 days to get the well and septic inspection scheduled.
Mhm.
And they were like, oh, well, we don't, they waived inspections. And I'm like, well, that's just for the home inspections. That's not for like the well and septic and everything. We're still required to do that. And they were just pushing back on me. So it kind of made me second guess myself a little bit. Like, is that
Well,
true?
It wasn't, it wasn't clear. That's all. It was just misunderstanding. But the general home inspections are a different part of the purchase agreement than the well and septic. And properly written, I think that offer would identify that the buyer hereby waives the inspections per paragraph 13 or 15, whatever the purchase agreement paragraph is. So you're
It's 15.
Okay, so you're identifying as a buyer's agent that we're waiving paragraph 15 inspections.
Right,
then-
which is not the well and septic paragraph.
Correct. So you're
Okay.
covered. You're covered.
Yeah.
And then it's still their obligation.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And I think well and septic, because that's a seller's expense, that's something that clearly you have to talk about. And I think I might have even drove right by it when I was doing the listing card, or no, that's purchase agreement. I'm sorry, wrong page. But you got to have that conversation. And I will say that well and septic inspections and surveys, we order for our buyers. However, I have them pump the tanks, our sellers, excuse me. So when it comes to tank pumping, somebody had a problem earlier where they didn't set enough sherry. They got one number. Well, there was 2 tanks instead of 1. So the number came in bigger. Had the seller gone out and ordered that sherry, you wouldn't have had that problem or felt obligated. Now, I will say that well and septic, we hire the sanitarian, but for tank pumping, we have the seller do that, because chances are they've already had the tanks pumped, and chances are they know where the lids are. Chances are they've got a favorite company they've used, and very good chance they've got a coupon from that company for their next tank pumping. They all come right on those pump cards. So, and they want cash at the time of pumping the tanks if preferable. So it's great to have the sellers there. They call it, schedule it, because they're going to be there. They're going to pay for it. And you don't have to get your hands dirty. So that was no pun intended.
That was good.
No pun intended. All right. What else?
I have a question
Yeah.
regarding, this is back a few forms that we talked about, the temporary occupancy for seller form.
Mhm.
Like, I've never seen that used as a buyer's agent, but I see the value in it for both parties. And I've had people with delayed occupancy. So would that be something like a buyer's agent could also present?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And yeah, per our conversation the other day in the meeting, it's just, there's so many nuances that you don't think of.
Right.
And the biggest thing is if that furnace fails, and we've got one going on right now. Kim doesn't know yet, but we had an offer accepted on a home. And it's really weird because the buyer's moving in for 3 months prior to close. All right, but it's still important to have that conversation. Who's going to pay utilities? Who's going to pay taxes? Who's going to have the responsibility for the mechanicals, right? Because the buyer's going to move into the home, but the seller still owns it for 3 months. So you got to think through all these, and that's what these forums do as much as anything, is get you to think about, oh yeah, I need to cover that or cover that.
I feel lucky that I slid by without any big issues, without using that, you know, all these months.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say it's a newer form, but it's 2018, it looks like. Been around a little bit. But we haven't been in this kind of a market where so many sellers are getting, you know, crazy possession after close and all.
Right. All right, thanks.
Yeah. We all good, guys?
Oh, Alan, this has been awesome. So we really appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. We
All right,
appreciate
guys.
your time this morning.
You're welcome. Reach out, guys, anytime you have questions. Happy to help.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.